Let's look at 1862. This is a new GMT release of something that had been kicking around and playable in an earlier edition. I don't know if it was Deep Thought or not. Okay. Nice thing about XX games for me, they're kind of like comfort food, you know? And I haven't been getting a lot of comfort food gaming since I started vidding, really. Which is to say, you know, now and then I come back to my old favorites, and one of those gets pulled out, the little lighter things and stuff that I enjoy. Not my only old favorites, but those favorites that are generally kind of light to play, maybe buckets of dice, whatever, things like Britannia. That, you know, anyway, I can only play them once on video usually. And then I feel like, well, I can't do another video on it. It's because doing the videos is still something of an expense, even the way I do them, in terms of chattering a lot more. And I very seldomly just pull them out and play them, which makes my gaming life overall less satisfying than it used to be, but whatever. But in this case, hey, it's a new XX game, new to me at least. I can throw this thing down and play it, and that makes me kind of happy. And actually, beyond that, I already played it once in my effort to avoid Vietnam, which I finally said the hell with. Now, wow, some people are going to put skip to 3 minutes after for where discussion of the game actually starts. Yeah, too bad. This isn't for those people. I mean, they can certainly watch. Where was I? Oh, yeah. So, one of the reasons that I tabled Vietnam was kind of the coronavirus thing. Whether or not I have it, I've certainly been sick, but the main impact has been almost minimal on my life. But then I'm realizing, wow, you know, there's a lot of people who maybe watch some of my videos and don't have much else to do, and, you know, if they've seen everything they want to see, well, I should be getting out more things rather than just sitting there on Vietnam. And given that I had already started my turn, I felt like I had to either finish that turn, which might have taken me a month, or the way I was going, or just say screw it, and I saw nothing further that I was going to gain from it. Okay, so let's take a look at this one. First of all, my background on it, obviously I love XX. When I see GMT putting one out, it's almost an auto buy for me. I look to make sure that it's not going to be an 18AL, 18GA type, just real simple clone. But if there's anything interesting looking about it, I go for it, because I like the components to the GMT games. They make really good thick tiles, and otherwise, you know, everything's in good quality. I actually prefer them to like the Deep Thought custom deluxe sets, which are beautiful and everything, but you know, they still kind of look print and play. There's just something to me about something that's, you know, mass produced. I don't know. Feels better to me somehow. So what do we got? Well, we've got an incredibly tiny little track area, actually. These are slots for all the different corporations, a whole bunch of them. This is a neat idea. A little map, submap with, and it's actually very useful in this, and I'll explain why. Because sometimes you have something like this in a game, which is also useful. Back page representation of the whole map or whatever as a reference. But with this here, you can put counters on it, and that actually is somewhat helpful to reminding you certain things. There's no advice to do so that I remember, but you've got a payout chart, how much each corporation runs for. Got a useful thing. Your standard bank pool. Trains, not separated into lots of little spaces. You don't have room to put all the trains out, but I like to set them up like this so I can see them a little better. Par values and a flat stock value. This is, I think, designed by the same guy who did 1860, which also had the flat stock chart. And a kind of tight little board. This one shows some very different design considerations. Probably wanted to save this for the review, but one of the basic considerations in this, I'm not sure. I didn't remember noticing it in the designer's notes, but there seems to be an attempt in this one to go for a little bit more realism in the way the stock market and finances work than in most XX games, and that's going to lead to a very different play. And notably, that players have a limited liability. You're not on the hook for a train ever. Your corporation has to have one, but the worst that you have is your investment in the company, your stock. That's the worst that you're at risk for on that corporation. Now, that can still be a huge hit, but it's a very different flavor to, look, you're bankrupt. And this game is also very much relying on using mergers to build bigger and better corporations. Now, 1861, which I don't think was his design, but I'm not sure. It was 60 and 61 were the two that were put out by Lookout that I have. That I really liked 61, had to have it. 60 ended up kind of winning my heart over too. But this one shows some similarity between the two. It's like got the stock market from 60 and the mergers from 61, but the mergers here are much more about, they're not just about building your route and collecting capital or whatever. There's something else here, which is this concept of train permits. Each corporate, and I'm not sure how reasonable this is, but there are going to be 3 different types of trains, each which have their own income flow, different kinds of revenue flows in the game. They're selected. Wow, I'm getting I think it's just a flicker off this. I don't think it's the camera. Okay, it's probably my hand shaking a little bit. The income flow for each of them is different, which means you want to design your track differently based on the different trains you have, your dots, whatever. But there are advantages to having combined trains. In particular, the freight goes well with one of the others, and there's more freights. But what's a little weird here is each corporation is only responsible for one type of train to begin with. And it's only through mergers that you can get multiple train types, which is kind of interesting. So it's not just geographical location, it's also the type of trains. I'll show you over here. You, of course, have your corporate charters. Comes with money. I haven't touched the money because my poker chips. I've become a believer in the chips rather than money. I have not yet set the bank. It's a $15,000 bank, and it is a hard limit in this game. The game can end either through that or through a corporation reaching the end of game, reaching a high enough stock value, or when the final train comes out, the H train here, and there's 3 different varieties of each train. They're represented, show you, they're represented on the same card, so that you got facing on one side, and then the other side is just the freight train. When that final train comes out, then there will be 3 more operating rounds at the end of the game. So there's no wankiness in like 1830. You have kind of a, well, when did the bank break type of thing. I actually don't know what happens when the bank breaks. I had the final train come out rather than anything else. I do know if you reach here, you complete that operating round and then end the game instead of continuing on, which is important because you would no longer have stock increases. That's always been one of the things that people didn't like in 1830. The track is different in this game. Okay, first things first. Okay, you know, you got your normals, you got your Ys, and there's different shape Ys. I've got them stacked together. You got your Ns, which are slightly more valuable, and will upgrade to bigger cities. But you got nothing that doesn't have doinkers, and doinkers are a little different in this game. They never block you. They never count as stations that you have to hit. They can generate income for some of the train types, but they don't, well, for one of the train types. You then have upgrades. For the cities, that's pretty normal. For the normal track, oh look, there's a very limited set. There's no merging of track in this game. Everything's crossovers, which is a little weird. And you have most of the varieties of, you know, hey, this track is already here. I can add this, or I could add this, you know. Those are all present. There's a slightly limited number of green tracks. You might run out of some of the different green options, but for the most part, there's a fairly large number of track tiles in general. There's not enough brown regular cities to cover all the cities on the map, but there's enough of the specials to cover everything. Let me think what else. Okay, now, hey, what happens to these dots when you grow track? Well, this is another neat little idea. Because you would have to print so many different types if you wanted to maintain the single dot, they created little dot markers, which are going to cover when you do an upgrade. So if I upgrade this to this, well, the dot on here is maintained on there with one of those little tokens. Now you also have the capacity in the game to add those little doinker dots. And they're not really doinkers, they're just bonuses in this game. In case you understand my terminology. You have a lot of corporations. This is not all of them. There's 20 in total. 16 of them will be in play. 4 of them are withdrawn from the game. So you have these not in play markers. And I put them over on here because that's sort of my reference map. You have 2 different types of off-board locations. You have red areas, not a lot of them, and then you have ports. Ports are kind of special. You'll notice you can't run from port to port or red area to red area, but you can run from red area to port. What else do we have that we want to talk about? Got some pieces I don't know about. Got these colored circles, which I think maybe are just black dots. Warranties. We didn't talk about warranties. When you buy a train, you can spend a little extra money to make sure you get a run off of it. For every warranty that you buy, and you can buy more than one, you can ensure that your train will get an extra run. Yeah, they're expensive. They're $50 each, but, you know, it allows you to prevent trains from rusting quite so fast. I didn't use them for that, but you automatically get a warranty on all A trains and all D trains, which are particular trains that if the train rushes exceedingly high, you could easily deny someone any run off a single train. I think most of the others, you will almost always get a single run. But it's certainly possible for the last D or the last A to not get a run. The warranties are only a guarantee of a run. So they go away even if you were like able to, you know, if you were allowed to make a run normally, the warranty doesn't do you anything and it goes away. You get the run, but you would have gotten it anyway. I'm going to speak very briefly to this. I have not read it. I have no idea what it's about, but it looked like there's a set of solo rules for that. Of course, I have no interest in a solo designed set of rules. The game will hold up to 8 players. There's different configurations for the game. I'm going to play the long game, but there's a short and a medium game, which have different numbers of trains involved in them. And they may have other differences as well. I do not know. Again, I focus on. I guess we could dig up the card and see. Yeah, maybe I'll come to that later when I've got time. Anything else here? You got, so one of the things I noticed when I picked up the box, I got this and Wild Blue Yonder at the same time. Man, two really heavy boxes full of stuff. You get a lot of components in this game, and you can see that with the stock shares, etc. And of course the heavy component, the heavy track tiles and everything. All right, let's start talking about the rules, and we're gonna have to swap batteries. So maybe I should do that now. And for starting this today, so I got to do long rolls. I had to do a review for Vietnam. My cough seems to be mostly gone today. It was there yesterday, so I mean it's an on and off thing. I've been kind of feeling crappier for the last week, but now I feel well again. I don't know. It's been 7-8 weeks now. No, more than that. 9 or 10 weeks. A little over 2 months. Anyway. Got some chit chat there. Okay. What do we got? So at the beginning of the game, you take all the director's certificates, shuffle them up, and deal 16 of them out. 8 of them will be available from the beginning of the game. The next 4 will be available when the B train is started, the second train basically, and 4 more available when the third of the train types. Now they go up to H. I don't know how to count that high. ABC, that's 3. I'm good with that. Okay. In addition, you will randomly assign little train types that the permit will be assigned to that company. That permit stays with that corporation no matter how many times that corporation will start, which is one issue here, is that corporations go back into the bank, back into the initial offering, and are available to be restarted. And even if they're unable to start at some point because they're blocked out, they can potentially come back due to a corporate bankruptcy or a merger. Okay, 7 or 8 players, they add some additional companies. You know, I may play this in 6. I played it in 8 last time without this option. You pretty much have the capacity to build one corporation, so it may be interesting to do it with less players this time. Set up for the different players. Starting money, like I said, the bank's $15,000. There's some simplifications. The main simplifications, the game is not particularly complex, but it violates a number of norms for XX games. For example, how you count stations and stuff like that. The simpler game variants are probably more aligned to bringing people who are used to XX into this than anything else. Although I don't know, it is a fairly complex XX to begin with. Your sequence of play is here. At the beginning of the game, you're going to have something called a Parliament round. You have a second Parliament round. The reason you need 2 of these is if you want to start 2 corporations in the before the game, at the beginning of the game. And then you have a stock round. And then from then on, you'll have a series of 1 to 3 operating rounds, very much like 1830. Let's see. 2 operating rounds on the B, 3 operating rounds on phase D where the brown comes in. So very, very much like it. And then after the end of that, you go to a single Parliament round where you're going to be able to, so you're able to start corporations in this round. But you start different kinds of corporations depending on whether you started in the Parliament or stock round. And we'll get to that in a moment. We can get to that now briefly. In the Parliament round, you start ones that are fully capitalized, but their par value is limited to these yellow values. In the Stock round, you can go anywhere from 54 up to 200 for your starting value, and any of the in-between values are allowed. That's kind of hard to remember because this just says 100 to 200, but it doesn't make a difference between those two which par value it is. Because the fully capitalized have an 1830 style initial offering that you can buy at par value from, whereas the non-fully capitalized, the incremental capitalization, you're always paying the stock value to the corporation for the shares. So it kind of doesn't matter as much what the par value was. There is one case, in the case of a forced train purchase, you might need to deal with the par value for those corporations. And it is limited to 100. That 200 doesn't help you in that case, or anything over 100. Okay, so how a parliament round works is starting with the person with the elephant, the priority deal in this game. Seems inappropriate anywhere except 53, but whatever. There's also a card for priority deal if you don't like elephants. You may propose that you're starting one of the available corporations and you put a bid on it. Your bid can range anywhere from 0 upward in $5 increments. Then each other player has the option. There's no privates in this game. This is the private auction, essentially. Each other player has the option to overbid you. If you drop out, you can't keep bidding. You don't come back in. Once everybody drops out except one person, the last person who bid they pay that money, and then they have the right to set the par value and buy the first 3 shares. The president's certificates in this game are 30%. 1 certificate, 3 shares. So, they also have the opportunity to buy up to 50%? Yeah. Maybe as many as they wish. I'm not sure. Yeah, up to 50% immediately. If you pay the 50%, if you buy all 5 shares, you float the company immediately, and its stock value is placed here, its token is placed on the board. You cannot try to start a corporation if it would not be able to put its token on the board either immediately or during its next projected during its first projected turn. The first projected turn being, if you laid track, would you have a space for the token, which is important. Of course, if there's no token at all, it's also important if the space is already filled, but with a track upgrade that's allowed at that moment, you would be able to lay it. If you put a charter down, you're under an obligation. 50% of that corporation must be sold to players. If it's not sold to players, you pay a big penalty. You lose the corporation, you are fined 5 times the par value at the end of the round, but you can sell, first it comes out of your pocket, but then you sell shares of the corporation floated, and finally by other stock sales. And then, if you did manage to pay it out of pocket, say, you still lose the shares. So there's no way to hold on to a presidency if you charter it this way. However, during the normal stock round, you can buy just the presidency and not float the corporation. Okay, now we go into a whole bunch of rules on merging. I'm going to skip these because they essentially take place during the operated rounds. And we'll go back to them in a little bit. I'm not quite sure why they're there, except that they have to be somewhere separate, but I'll jump into them in that other order. For the normal stock round, it's a normal priority deal. It's not moved by the charter round. If somebody buys a charter, whoever wins the bid, the next person to their left normally, to right in my game, because I do things mirror world for whatever reason when I'm playing solo. Only solo. It doesn't bother me one bit when I'm playing real. That next person would have the first option to open up a new charter. You cannot open up You cannot open a bid on a charter if you just started a charter. Okay. It's kind of interesting. Some of the rules to this are similar to 21 Moons. I'm kind of curious whether the 21 Moon players incorporated from this some of the design ideas. So some of the same attempts. That's a not yet published XX game that was very interesting. I just did a play test video of it, which is combination, hey, some promotional value to it, but also thoughts that they can incorporate before they ever publish, if they do. Okay, so during a stock round, this works kind of like normal XX. You're allowed to sell a bunch of shares, then you can purchase a single share or start an unchartered corporation. And if you do neither of those, you passed. Directorship changes as normal in an XX game. Here's one that's different. Remember, like I said, it's a limited liability game. You can sell all your shares in a corporation, even if nobody else can take the presidency. You can dump the presidency into the bank pool. It goes into receivership if nobody owns the presidency. And it continues to run. You can't buy the director's share directly from the bank pool. You have to buy it one share at a time until you can trade in for it. But if somebody has has enough shares for the presidency, they get it immediately. Okay, when you sell shares, you can sell any number of shares. You sell at the current price, and if the corporation does not have a train when you sell it, you only get half value for it. The stock market will zigzag one space per share sold to the company bank pool. I think this is the same that 60 uses. So you'd go from 182, 174, 160, boom, boom, boom. Now, you'll note that that's not how the increases go, which is kind of interesting. There's certain locations, color zones. So the first share sold doesn't affect in this area or this area unless the director sells it. And the first two shares sold don't affect here. And that's by one player, I believe. So you have to be selling a big block of certificates to affect the price when it's very low or very high. Now note, if the price goes down to zero, the corporation is bankrupt and it closes, all the stock is gone and it's just gone. That's a little hard to buy. And let me tell you why. If a corporation doesn't have debt, stock does not go down to zero, right? It really doesn't. If something has actual assets and is runnable and workable, it would not go to zero. However, in reality, it's really unlikely that somebody's going to be able to dump something like this unless it's got so many problems in terms of price value, it's been sucking wind or whatever, that you could say that it's taking on debt with some hand waving or something, and that it is actually financially not stable. Taking on bad debt because it's such a poor investment, apparently. Okay, certificate limit. There's restrictions on selling shares. You may not sell shares that you bought during the current stock round. This is the same as 21 Moon. This may be in 1860 as well. This is one of those tricky little rules that I can never remember. It does prevent manipulation of the stock market, but there isn't much desire to manipulate the stock market in this. But some people get really unhappy in 1830, for example, with buying things out of the IPO to make sure you start first or whatever. You can't play those games here. And that's what it's really preventing. It doesn't have much more effect than that, really. Except You bought something. This is what I don't like about it. You buy something and now something better becomes available and you're like, well, now you can't sell that share and get it back. Get an option to buy something you'd rather have. And that's the I feel like I'd rather have the stock manipulation ability, which I've seen every now and then, but I'd rather have that than be prevented from exchanging for something you'd rather have. I don't think the stock manipulation would hurt this too much, to tell you the truth. But anyway, buying shares. Okay, if you buy it from the IPO, it goes into the bank. If you buy it from the corporate charter, corporations have two ways of starting, and if they start as an unchartered company, which is revealed this way, not much difference, but you see more dots available here, then all the shares that are remaining are in here. It is possible for a chartered corporation, though, to buy shares back and redeem them into there. Those shares are part of the corporate owning, unlike in 1870, which allows you to redeem shares. In this game, players can just buy shares from the corporation at any time. At any time they're allowed to buy shares. They will pay the full market price, though, whatever that may be. Okay, so let's go back here. You're never allowed to buy shares in a corporation you sold during the stock round. That's pretty standard. You can't dump the price so you can buy more shares or anything like that. The certificate limit, based on the number of players. And if you're above the certificate limit, you must sell them at the start of the next turn in a stock round. However, at the end of the game, the certificate limit goes higher to the highest number of shares held by any one player at that point. Now remember, these are 30%, so for every directorate someone owns, they have 3 shares on one certificate. So there's a good chance that, let's say you're playing an 8, that there's going to be at least 10 shares as the final limit. And that's kind of important because it allows all the corporations to sell out. I don't know how big a deal it is, but it gives you more opportunity to make money off your certificates. But I really don't know what it helps. It helps the person who has a lot of money left over that's not tied up in corporations, whatever that means. Okay, and this remains for the rest of the game, which is no big deal. Once the LNER is formed, you never have to sell shares again to get under the certificate limit. Not sure how that could happen. Oh, presidency changes. Okay, so you could probably take advantage of that in some really weird ways if you wanted to work with someone. Okay, in order to start a corporation, the director's certificate has to be in the IPO. The company's home base hex has to be empty or have a free station space on there. Or the company would be able to place its home station marker when it gets to operate. And that station marker space is semi-reserved for them. Someone can go in there, but they'll get bumped out. Flotation is 50% of the corporation. And then it gets money into the treasury. Now, if it's chartered, it gets 10 times its par value. If it's not chartered, it gets the value, the number of shares times the par value, the number of shares that were sold. Now, when you buy a corporation, if you buy a chartered corporation, you will get 3 tokens at the beginning, and you have to pay $180. You will not have to pay to actually place the tokens. You just have to pay at this point out of your initial starting treasury. If you buy a non-chartered corporation, you must buy between 2 and 7, and there's an option to allow an eighth, tokens at only $40 each. They're $60 each for the chartered corporation, for whatever reason. Again, out of your starting treasury. You will not get more tokens. You have to do some pre-planning and some pre-thinking. In general, you usually don't buy many tokens, because there's other ways to get them. You also start with a train permit, which is linked to the particular type of train that your corporation started with. That will be tracked throughout the course of the game. I am thinking about the possibility of randomizing these as corporations rebirth. I'm not going to do that this play, but someday I may try that. Simply because I don't like the idea that Corporation X always is going to start with a freight train, and that's all it can run at the beginning of the game, when it first starts. But, yeah. Okay. When the stock round ends, priority is given to the player who passed first. Okay. Operating rounds. Operating order, the first thing you're allowed to do is merge with another corporation. If you do this, we'll talk about it in a little bit, but you basically are turning them into one corporation, and you're merging their stocks, etc. Then you're allowed to layer upgrade track using track tiles, place a single station marker, second one on your starting turn, run your trains to gain revenue, choose to pay dividends or retain, purchase any trains, redeem a share from the bank pool, buying it into your corporate shares with corporate money, and then you're given another chance to essentially merge, called acquiring another operating company. They're essentially the same thing. Let's go to those merge rules then. And there's one more thing that kind of impacts merging, which is if you can't afford a train, you may be forced to refinance your corporation, and that has similarities to the mergers. Okay, so if you merge at the start of the company's operating turn, the two directors have to agree, probably the same player. The shares in the two corporations are combined 2-for-1 into shares of the surviving company, and then it operates if neither of the constituent companies have operated that turn. If either one has, it doesn't get an operating round after that. It just passes for the rest of its turn. Okay. At the end of your company's operating turn, you're also allowed to acquire a company. It's the same thing. And in either case, the surviving corporation will not operate. And you exchange your shares 2-for-1. Company refinancing during forced train repurchase. If you're forced to repurpose a train, you may have to merge those 2-for-1s. We'll go into more detail on the merging procedure. There's special rules having to do with the half shares. So you count up the number of shares you have in the two corporations involved. If it's an even number, you get half of those of the new corporation. If it's an odd number, you get half rounded down, and then one of your shares gets turned over, and it is an option share. And you will get the opportunity to choose to buy a share of the remaining corporation, of the new corporation, by putting half the new stock value into the bank, if there's a share available. Otherwise, you get half the share value in your pocket. And it's possible that might put you up against share limits, which would restrict your choices. Okay. Potentially, I don't know. All right. So, on the company's first operating turn, it gets its home station marker. If the home station marker is empty, the first track must be to lay the track on the station X. If it's got a track tile that doesn't have space for the token, then you must upgrade so that you have space. There is one other possibility. If there's insufficient space on the company home station hex for the company to place its station marker there, it displaces a token already there, sent back to the company owning it. It'll be the last corporation that placed it there. Now, because the restrictions on when you can start a corporation, that will never happen unless somebody ran before you in that operating round and placed a dot there. And basically they can have a temporary dot there, they get it back, and they can use it to make one run or whatever. Which is a weird little situation. It doesn't cost them anything. Remember, you paid your dots up front. As long as you get it back, you're okay. So there's some reasons people might just do that. It is possible to merge a corporation on its very first action. It's considered to have a dot in that space before it lays its track or whatever. If the company doesn't have a director, it's in receivership. It won't lay track or place station markers. It'll run its trains, and it will retain all revenue. And by the next train, it's allowed to. Okay. Routes. Routes are weird in this game. I can leave this here. Okay. A route is a continuous length of track, including at least one city other than London, with a station marker on it belonging to the company. You can't go through cities that are tokened out by other companies. You may not use any segment of track more than once on a corporation. What is not spelled out here is whether you can hit the same city more than once. I believe you can in this game. And there's reasons why that's not problematic. So if you were here, I believe you could run from here on a tight curve and coming out. And you'll see why that's not a problem. But you can't run over the same segments of track. Okay. A route cannot go into London unless you have a token in the London space. And you may never use that token as your token that allows your train to run on the track that it's on. Remember, any train has to run through a city or into a city that has a token on it. But London is a special case that doesn't count. That's just a special, that allows you to get to London. Okay. So, since mergers and acquisitions are the first thing, and we haven't gone into multiple trains, which is one of the weird things in this game. They have different restrictions. An operating company can merge with another at the start of its operating turn. It can be acquired at the end of the turn. There has to be consent. The two corporations have to be connected by a track. There has to be an uninterrupted route from a station marker from one of the companies to a station marker from the other company. This applies if they both have station markers in the same city. You cannot use London to trace your connection. You determine the new share price, which is going to be the lower of the two share prices plus half the higher share price, rounded down to the nearest valid price. If you don't have a train, any corporation without a train has half the share price for this. Then you fix the par price, which is going to be the highest par price that's a little equal to or lower than the share price that was determined. At this point, you do the merging, 2 for 1, with options to buy. Then everything is collected together on the corporation whose turn it is. They're the ones who are buying out the other corporation one way or the other. This is important because they maintain their starting hex. Why is that a matter? You'll see. When you're running trains, you need to run one train through your initial starting hex. If a company is merged or any other way comes off the game, comes out of the game, bankruptcy, whatever, it goes back into the IPO with its license type, is that the right term? Permit type. And all its tokens are removed from the map one way or another. And it can be restarted in the same home city with the same train type, which may not be possible, but there you have it. Okay. When you build track, you have the following options on a turn. 1 yellow end tile, 2 non-end yellow tiles. Ends are more valuable, more complex, I don't know. Upgrade a yellow track to green, a green to brown. Place a small station, one of these guys that I was talking about. You can only have one per segment of track, so you're not going to have like 3 of these on one thing. Or put your token in London. Those are what count as track builds. Some track on the new tile must form part of a route of the company. None of the track on the tile can run into a red barrier or into the sea, other than ports. A tile with a large station can only be on a town. A tile with a small station only on a space showing a village. If it has a letter, it has to follow the letter. Okay. Okay, my voice is beginning to shoot. This is, again, I had this in 21 Moon too. Some of the track on the new tile must form part of a route on the company. It's not some of the new track on the new tile, which means you just have to hit something on that track and you can upgrade it. Therefore, you can upgrade track to screw people over that doesn't connect to you. In particular, if you're running this, you could build this to prevent people from over here from being able to connect easily. I'm never particularly happy about that. I think 1830 has different rules where it has to be new track on the new tile, but I'm not sure. I don't really remember. Okay. And I have to urinate. Standard rules for maintaining track. You have to maintain the track layouts that you have. It's actually easier in this game than in any other because there's no connections. It's all just crossovers there. Cities maintain their positioning. Small stations. If there's no small station on a segment, instead of laying track, you can put a dot down. Only on clear track. You can't put it where there's a city. Okay. Building to London. If you're able to do normal connection to London, then you can drop a dot there and that'll allow you to make runs there. Station markers. You're allowed to place 1 station marker per operating round in addition to your home station marker when you place that. Home station marker has to be put in your city with your corporate logo, name, whatever, acronym. Once a station marker is built, it remains on the map. In general, forever, but mergers and acquisitions can cause them to be changed, bankruptcy, and getting bumped by the home station marker of a corporation that you just tried to sleaze your marker into. All right, the train routes. This is where it gets complicated. Train routes run between towns and villages along the tracks shown on the tile. I don't think they ever run between villages. They run over villages. They must trace a route between stations connected by track, gain revenue. This is all standard. They must begin and end in large stations or off-board areas. Off-board areas being the red or the ports. They may not end in small stations and must include at least 2 large stations or 1 large station and an off-board location. At least 1 run for the company has to include the town with the home station marker. Any such run is the main run. The next run must intersect with the main run at any large station, not off-board. The connecting large station does not need to be occupied by a company station marker. In fact, you could be dotted out and have 2 segments of your track connect somewhere, and that's fine. Okay, let me see what we have here. Each further run must intersect with a previous run in a similar way using the same or different large stations to connect. A route run by a train must follow a continuous line of track shown on the tiles and boards. You may not run from a port to a port or from an off-board, from a red area to a red area. Tokened out stations can be included, but only as a terminus. You may only run trains you have a permit for. When you run more than one train, the trains may run on the same track as each other, but each individual train cannot use part of its own route. And you may visit a station or off-board, this is more than once with this is what's weird. So this is worded very specifically in a way that leads me to think that you can't do that loop around. A company may visit a station or off-board area more than once with different trains. It's that with different trains. But each station and off-board area is only scored once when calculating revenue. That's important. But it has some specifics to it that are not very carefully laid out. First of all, do they really mean you can only do that with different trains? Because the other rule doesn't state that. And then the other is, small stations are stations, so you can't count them. But they do actually get counted not as stations for other things. In which case, I believe they still get counted as hexes that the train traveled through. And that's important for a couple types of trains. Okay. I am going to allow loop-throughs because remember, you don't hit the city twice. You don't score it twice. And you are following the rule that, you're using this track and then you're using this track. It's not clear which way it's intended to go. It makes sense to me that you'd be able to loop around like that for various reasons. And we may see some of the cases of why I'm in favor of it as we play. Okay, so 3 different types of trains. First is the freight train. The freight train is a distance in hexes by its number. Well now, what do you mean by a 1? Yeah, it's intervening hexes. It can start or finish in a city or area. Let's see what we have here. Okay. The maximum number of hex... Oh, shit. Okay. It's not intervening. I played this all wrong, and freight trains were too powerful. Freight trains are defined by the distance they can travel in hexes. A freight 3 can start in one station and travel 3 further hexes. In this case, so the maximum number of hexes visited is equal to the number of the train plus 1. Freight trains score the start and finish cities and areas, and 20 more points per intervening hex as the crow flies. So that you actually count the distance, not the length of track that they follow. In which case, yeah, you're not even going over that track. Why would you be penalized for, say, 2 freight trains running over the same piece of track? No matter how long the route taken by the train, only the shortest distance between start and destination is used. Now, if one of your endpoints is a port, instead of 20 per intervening hex, you get 30 per intervening hex. And you ignore the barriers around Harwich, but I don't think you can... I don't know. Never mind. I don't think that counts. I think only the barriers around Harwich are of any importance there. Okay. Oh, for off-board locations with more than one entry point, you may choose the point of entry when counting distance. Well, that's very interesting. I thought you had to choose the closest. So, for example, if I made a run from here to here, I would be counting from here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, I guess. I'm not sure. It's intervening hexes. Yeah, so 7. Okay. Freight trains completely ignore small stations. If a company runs multiple freight trains, they must connect with each other end to end, and they only score points of the combined trains plus the bonus for the intervening hexes. So they basically become a bigger train. Something else I screwed up when I played. So an F1 and an F3 would act the same as an F5. Really? No, 2 F1s and an F3. Yeah. So you actually lose some distance off that because an F1 can connect 2 stations. I don't know. Anyway. So having multiple freight permits may not be such a good thing. Except that 2 or more permanent freight trains, and this exemption may have applied when I played solo, when I played not on video, the F6 through F9 may operate completely separately. If you have a mixture of permanent and non-permanent, the non-permanents must all still connect end-to-end with each other and at least one of the permanent freight trains. Okay, the next type is the local. The local runs between cities and doinkers. But it cannot run off-map locations. Local trains score all stations, including small stations, which are worth 20 each. The number on the train is the number of large stations the train can visit, and it visits all intervening small stations. This can be very valuable in areas where there are a lot of non-city spaces. I had something that was running a loop around here, so it was hitting a lot of these 20s, and there can be more than one dot in a hex as long as there's more complex track. In addition to that, before it gains revenue, it gets a $10 subsidy into its own treasury for each hex that it visited with any of its local trains. So now this is each hex visited by its local trains. So if 2 local trains go through the same hex, you only get $10 for that hex. That seems pretty specific. This money doesn't count as revenue, it just goes into your corporate treasury. But there's a special rule, this George Hudson maneuver, that allows you to potentially use corporate revenue to pay out dividends. If the local train has 2 values on it, like this one, it's allowed to visit 3 large cities, and it only counts the score for 2 of them. That can be useful because when you have to connect at a large city, and you might want to be scoring, well, you'll see. It just works. It works out that can be very useful in a way that you wouldn't think it is. Not just skipping a shitty city. It can be useful when you're looking at something like this, because you might be using this as an endpoint for, say, an express train, and then you don't want to count it, so then you would count this and this for the local, say, running this track, and then the express would be running up here or something. I don't know. Whatever. All right, I got to swap batteries. Different train types each run. This is one of the places where this game really diverges from most XX games. All right, to the last of the train types that you can have, it's Express. This runs only to large stations, including the off-board locations. They score all large stations and off-board areas on their route. They ignore small stations. But remember, they can't count stations that either a freight or a local of the same corporation have hit. The express trains have NMs sometimes, and that works the same way, where you pick 2 out of the 3 best stations. That's less valuable than the local, because remember, the local picks up the doinkers along the way. And you can choose not to count your company home base, even if this is your route that's running through the home base. Then they give some examples of multiple trains running. All right. Dividends. Okay, something I didn't mention here. Sometimes the flat tracks do this. They seem to work better for it. I don't know why. They seem to be more likely to do it. Multiples of your stock value end up giving you greater movement on the track. And it's big in this one. This is 1829 big. You total up the revenue your corporation, your trains all made, and then you decide whether to pay it out or not. Paying out, it's 10% per share. If no dividend is paid, the stock price moves back a space. If a dividend is paid and it's less than the current share point, the price stays the same. If it's greater than or equal to share, it goes up one space. If it's greater than twice the share, it goes up 2 spaces. Greater than 3 times, it goes up 3 spaces. And then the maximum greater than 4 times, it goes up 4 spaces. You can make up a lot of ground by swallowing, in terms of stock value, by swallowing once and getting a huge run out of it. The 1829 was the not only the first XX, but it was also the one that introduced this. And then 1830 took that away and just said, nah, you either paid out or you didn't. You end up at the, this is nicely worded. This company share price marker is placed at the bottom of any stack of share price markers it moves to. If the share price does not move, it is placed on the bottom of the stack of share prices in the current position. This was something that wasn't properly handled in some of the other rules. I think 1870, for example. It was always whoever's first in there, in the space, stays there first. Here it's very, very specific that it tells you what happens, and it's easier to handle mechanically or mental mechanically than trying to remember who got there first, even if they didn't run first. Okay. The George Hudson maneuver. If you earn a revenue of $10 or more, 10 pounds or more, and it's lower than your company share price, you're allowed to use money from your treasury to increase the company revenue up to the corporate share price, and then it'll pay out, and more importantly, go forward. I mean, it'll pay out anyway, but it'll pay out the additional revenue. Purchasing trains. You start with a single train permit, allowing a single train type. You can buy any types of trains you like, but you can only get revenue from the ones you have permits for. You have to buy the trains in order. There's 3 different types of trains in each set, but they all have the same cost. Trains can be bought from the bank or from another company for the current train cost. This is a fixed price. You can't rape a company by trading trains in it. But you can grab a train with one of your corporations to use for another one, just to make sure you reserve it, stuff like that. Game phases are based on the train types. You should probably take a look at the phases. So phase A is yellow tiles available with 1 operating round. Everybody gets a free warranty. Phase B, green tiles are available and we're up to 2 operating rounds. Phase C kills the A's, and these values go up. A little different from most. Most align the color of the track to the color more clearly, but here green doesn't become available here until there. Phase D, the brown tiles are available. There's 3 operating rounds per, and these are warranted again because they're possible, or fairly possible to run out. Phase E kills the phase B trains. It puts us up to the highest value there. And train limits. So at the beginning of the game, you are allowed, I believe, 3 of each train type, and it goes down to 2 of each type here in any corporation. Phase F kills the C trains. Phase G kills the D trains, and you're allowed only a total of 3 trains total but they can be any types. So you could actually have 3 of the same. That's a pretty bad idea, but. And then phase H, you get 1 more operating round after this is first bought. And people are able to do track building and token placement. That's 1 operating round, 1 of these squares here. Then there's going to be a stock round, and then there's a no track building, no token placing, but you can buy trains, set of 3 operating rounds. They can largely just be calculated out on a spreadsheet, as was done here. Actually, well, it's a little more complicated than that. I use this for the most part. And then you score the final values. Now, let's go back, crappies, to what's here. Is there a limit to how many trains you can buy? I don't think so. Okay. You can't buy a train. This is like most XX, but 21 Moon had something different. You can't buy a train if you're full up, even if it would clear one of your trains. Okay, train warranties. Like I said, you can buy warranties. They cost you £50 each from the company treasury, and they're placed on the train when you buy it. They can't be transferred. You can never have more than 3. When your train runs, you lose a warranty marker, whether or not you ran the train and whether or not it needed the warranty. If it has warranties on it, but would normally go obsolete, it doesn't rust until the warranties are all removed. You get free warranty on the A and D train because they're particularly risky. Forced train purchases. And I did not buy any warranties, but the free ones came in handy. We'll see. Okay, forced train purchases. You must have a train at the end of your operating turn. If you have no train, you have to buy one from the bank or from another company. Always for face value. Then you have to raise money to buy the next train from the bank if you can't buy one. The company director has to first sell company stock. If you have enough shares on your charter, you can sell these shares in order to buy a train. The price paid for these shares is the stock market price sold at full value, not half value, because you will be getting a train with them immediately. You can only sell the minimum number of shares in order to buy the train. They go to the bank pool as if a player just bought them. The money goes into the revenue. You don't have to get people to buy out your shares. But this only works when you're forced to sell a train. If you couldn't afford a train, then you're not allowed to sell these shares, and you may have to refinance. Another option is you can refinance. You're issuing additional shares to get revenue. Company shares are reclaimed from the players back into the bank pool, and the company gets funds into the treasury. You get these exchanges at 2 for 1, and then the company gets 10 times its current par value. Okay? Current par is important because when you first place something, you set a par value. But after mergers, the par value gets reset. If you can't afford a train after refinancing, you're not allowed to take that option. You can't do both. It's one or the other. One of them has to work. If neither one works on its own, you go bankrupt. Well, your company goes bankrupt. If your company goes bankrupt, it has no train and can't afford to buy one, or if its share price goes to 0. If its share price goes to 0, the company's just wiped out and it goes back available to be restarted. But if it goes bankrupt due to a train loss, and this is the one that kills me, I find this very hard to believe. Just as I find it hard to believe that a company can go bankrupt through dropping its value to 0. Nothing goes to 0 if it's still operable, right? Players owning shares in bankrupt companies get compensation equal to the current share point. This will be 0 if the share price is now 0, but maybe something if bankruptcy occurs to lack of train. So you're going to go back a space for not being able to run your lack of train. Although With a warranty, you might run it once, the warranty goes away, and then the train immediately rusts. And therefore, you actually could have gone forward before running out of trains, just as a possibility here. And then you might not have any shares to sell, and you might not be able to refinance high enough if you have a low par value to buy the current train, which means your shares are exchanged for the value that they are at that moment. Wow. That is weird to me. I'm not sure who's buying you at full share value for all your resources. That seems even weirder than like going down to zero, bankrupting, the company. All right, I gotta swap batteries once more. Redeeming stock. During your operating round, you're allowed to buy one stock from the bank pool at current price. This is after you run, so the price may have gone up. And of course, if you swallowed, you may have extra cash. That puts it in here. You'll collect any income from it, and eventually somebody will buy it from you. And the money goes back in your treasury. Mergers and acquisitions. Acquisitions, this is just like the mergers. Exactly. Except it happens after you've run. So there will not be, you won't be running. Receivership. If the director's certificate is in the bank, it's in receivership. It stays there until somebody gets enough shares to be director. It's operated by the majority shareholder. Ties broken clockwise from priority deal. The company will take part in operating rounds, but it's really restricted. It can't lay track, it can't play station markers. It must swallow, and it will buy a train. A maximum of one train per operating round, though. I don't know what a company with that much money on it is doing in receivership if it can buy more than one train, but okay. It'll be a type for which the company owns a permit. There's some tie breaking in there. It will not sell trains to any other corporation. It cannot merge or be acquired. We've already talked about the different train phases. They're here. Broken up because like the simple game has different rules. The game end. The game ends when somebody hits the stock market of 1,000 and you finish the current operating round. If the bank runs out of money, current operating round is finished and the bank becomes infinite to finish it up. Or the formation of the London and Northern Eastern Railroad, which happens when the first H train is bought. There's an infinite number of H trains. There aren't enough cards for that. There aren't enough for normal play, I think. I had to make two up. No more parliament rounds, no more track building or token placement, no more companies can be started. Companies cannot merge or acquire. All company shares in the IPO go into the bank pool. They can be bought only at stock market price. Remember, there's sort of an arbitrage that happens in 1830, and that can happen in this game with chartered corporations, where, you started the company at 54, and now it's worth 100. Well, that's clearly the thing you want to buy, especially since, well, you can't sell it immediately. That's one difference. But, yeah. Trains can only be bought from the bank, not from other companies. The game may not end due to the bank running out of money, although a company reaching top of stock market will still end it a little short. And the stock certificate limit changes to the largest number of shares that any one player holds at that point. Now, if somehow everybody's gone bankrupt, that could actually lower the certificate limit, but with mergers, people could end up doing a lot of mergers just before that age, and there might not be full stock portfolios. Some interesting design notes, but they were mainly historical rather than real design notes. Some basic ideas of this. Strangely enough, I did not find much about why this mechanism is chosen particularly type of decision making, which is kind of what I am always interested in. So like I look at this and I say, limited liability. That makes sense, okay? The different types of trains, kind of, but that seems more like a gamey decision to me. Stock values going up by multiples makes sense. The same corporations coming back with the same train type always? Not sure why. The warranties seems like a gamey decision, but okay. The particular types of track, again, an interesting decision. It would be nice in the game design notes to talk about the game design. Much of this is the historical aspect of it, which is interesting. I absolutely like a historical section, but I saw game design notes, thought this game is doing a lot of interesting things, but I remembered reading it and I look over it again and I'm like, yeah, those aren't mainly game design notes. Those are historical notes. Go very little into the design decisions themselves. The one that really is iffy for me are the bankruptcy rules. So to some extent, I definitely see limited liability and the stock market movement as being historical accuracies. The mergers, a historical accuracy of how the companies can be built up. And in fact, that very nicely maps to the historical stuff too. The different train types, well, there certainly are different types. Again, I don't know. I feel like those are more game mechanisms that are being, what is the word I like for that? Thematic. Yeah. Has nothing to do with reality. It just sort of feels kind of right. Yeah, the word everybody uses for something else, like representational. But I really do not get the bankruptcy rule. That feels like, first of all, the fact that there's a zero here, okay, it's an interesting little thing. In a game that's trying so hard not to harsh people, though, the fact that you can destroy a company by selling shares of it, although it is harder, that is intriguing to me. But it may be your only way to clear a hex, a dot out or something. So I'm not terribly opposed to that, but then the idea that something is potentially full stock value, at the point, it's not even halved, okay? It's not even the half value from what I read it as. Maybe I'm mistaken there. You can go bankrupt and make your full stock value off of it if you engineer it correctly. I just don't get that. Let me make sure I understand. Let me make sure I don't think that the half is true. So you have no company stock. So you will not sell company stock to get it. Refinancing, you've used up so much money and you've gotten late in the game, your par value isn't going to cover it. At this point, the value of their shares as compensation. Oh no, it is halved. Okay, at least it's halved. All right. So there it could be seen as a sell-off that causes things. But here's the problem. A corporation with perfectly good assets in hand is not going to go bankrupt unless there are loans. So again, this might be covering loans. The other thing might be covering the fact that the assets that it has could be sold off. But stock value and assets have nothing to do with each other. That's what I say. What I've seen from it, yeah, look at the prices here. You may not get that high. You probably won't get that high. But I got up in here some big runs happen in this game because of the mergers and the different types of trains and the way that they interact. So like a freight train can work well with a local or express train. You can get some massive runs. That's even given the fact that you don't double count any stations. So like normally you get your massive runs by, I hit New York City 3 times. Great. Okay. I'll send this up, and it took plenty long, and then we'll start playing.